Perfect. So the first thing that I'm going to go over, you don't need to have any props for this session, but if you do have a blanket for some of the instability work, that will be helpful. So I'm just going to go through the yoga props that I use on a regular basis. And those are my yoga blocks and a lacrosse ball and yoga strap, but you can substitute certainly with a belt, and these are optional things. You don't absolutely need them. And then a foam roller, if you have one, is awesome for skiers. And then for instability work, you can use just a folded blanket, and that's going to be a slightly unstable surface to stand on, or a cushion or a pillow, or you could use a wobble cushion. These are really great. I use this actually at my stand-up desk, and so I'm working on core strength while I'm working at my computer. And then this is my wobble board. And I'm going to demonstrate using this, but again, everything that I'm going to be demonstrating, you could simply do it standing on a blanket, and that'll work fine too. So we'll start our practice just in a seated position on our mats. And you can sit elevating your pelvis on either a blanket or a pillow or a cushion. And with your hands on your knees, just closing your eyes and centering. And the reason we start our practice with just a seat, eyes closed, focus on breath, is so that we can hit the pause button on our day and make a very clear delineation between everything that happened before and our yoga practice. And then at the end, we can unpause and resume. But for this session, for this 1 hour, we commit to being fully present on the mat, connected to our breath, so that we can have this little bit of respite from the stress and busyness of our day. So with that in mind, please drop your shoulders away from your ears. Allow your belly to relax so you can inhale, belly expands forward in space. And with your exhale, the belly draws back towards the spine. Inhaling fully. And then exhaling slowly and deeply. Now opening your eyes. We'll start with just a relaxing stretch session for the neck. Now, these stretches I find are really good after I've been out on snow for the day. The cold itself just makes me shrug my shoulders, and that causes all of the muscles in the side of my neck to get really sore. In particular, for some reason, the scalenes and the sternocleidomastoid muscles get really tight, and that translates into pain in my shoulder blade. So these poses for the neck, we want to go gently into. With this next inhale, lengthen your entire spine. And as you exhale, drop your ear to your shoulder. You can take the opposite hand and just guide that ear towards shoulder, but we don't want to pull hard. At the same time, if we extend our fingertips down to the floor, we get this muscular activation in the shoulder that intensifies the stretch without having to crane on the neck. It's very gentle, mostly letting gravity do the work. And inhaling and turning your nose in line with your knee, taking the hand to the back of the head. And we draw the chin towards the chest. Now the direction the nose is pointing, the opposite hand goes in direct opposition to that. So for me, my nose is pointing to my left knee, my right hand is reaching diagonally backwards. And this moves the stretch towards the back of the neck. And then inhaling up through center. Same two poses on the opposite side. So taking my right ear to my right shoulder, my left fingertips press into the mat on the left side of my body. And I'm just coaxing that ear to shoulder, but not pulling hard. And the more I can make my torso upright, in contrast to the tilt of the neck, the more I encourage a stretch here. And I'm working on just making the length of the exhale a little longer than the inhale. And by doing that, I'm coaxing my nervous system into relaxing. With our inhale, we come up through neutral, turn your nose in line with your knee, and draw the back of your head in and down. Opposite hand pressing on the diagonal to feel the stretch towards the outer back side of the neck. And still keeping the belly soft so that the belly can move on the inhale. And one more breath. And on the inhale, coming into neutral. So we've started with the neck and shoulders. We've started up top. Now we're going to switch all the way down to the feet. And I'm going to explain specific points of the foot that we want to be aware of as skiers, especially if we're working on refining our technique. So on my foot, I have this knuckle of the first metatarsal, the fifth metatarsal, and the center of the heel. When we teach people to ski, we teach them to balance on a triangle between those 3 points. But actually, to really nail balance on the skis, there's a point right here. And when I try to teach people this, I say, oh gosh, I wish I could take my ski boot off and show you this spot, because it's really hard to explain what the front of the heel and the back of the arch actually means. It's this point right here. And if you could see a diagram of my foot, there are actually 4 bones that intersect in this particular point. And it's right at the termination point of the lower leg bone. So if I rotate my leg at the femur, that pivot point is really small. It's right here. So we want to massage that point. You can do it either just with your thumb and finger, or you can do it with a lacrosse ball. I recommend doing this every day after you get the ski boots off. So just rolling the lacrosse ball under the arch of the foot. Looking in particular for that balance point, because that's possibly going to be sore on the inner arch. But I don't need to be terribly precise. What I want to do here is counteract the effect of the ski boots. And there's so many joints in the feet and the ankles, and tons of articular cartilage, or places where bone and bone is coming close to rubbing. And the cartilage in between facilitates the smooth gliding. But if the bones get locked up and tight, you get this grinding. That's certainly not healthy for the feet. We'll switch to the other foot. So there are two things you can do. One, visit your boot fitter often. But two, and very easy, is just do this every day. Massage the muscles in the bottom of the feet. Allow all the little bones in the feet to fan out over the lacrosse ball. It's the equivalent of doing a stretch, but for tissue in these very tiny places. Oh, and if you get used to doing this, your body is like, oh, thank you. Thank you for doing this. Excellent. So now we're going to go to the middle. We've done the neck, we've done the feet. Now we're going to do a little bit of work for the spine. So for this, we'll come into an all-fours position on the mat. And I'm just going to move the spine through its full range of motion in flexion and extension. So knees, hip distance, hands, shoulder distance apart. I inhale. And as I exhale, I'm going to draw my belly button up towards the ceiling, top of the head and tailbone, reach down. Inhale, curve the spine. And exhale, arching the spine. We'll do this for a few cycles of breath, and I'll explain why it's beneficial, even though it seems like a very small, inconsequential movement. This actually moves the synovial fluid around the intervertebral discs, and that's how they get oxygen and nutrients. Moving the spine through its full range of motion actually also helps us have better posture and better alignment when we ski. Great for preventing injuries, but also absolutely essential for improving our technique and our performance on ski. So then from there, coming into a neutral spinal position, and we're going to curl the toes underneath, lifting the pelvis up, but keeping the knees bent. And this is really just a setup. I'm going to fan out my toes. I'm looking down at them, I'm anchoring the big toes, and then I'm fanning out the rest of the toes. So that when I lower my knees back down, my toes are really stretched out. And I'm going to walk my hands towards my heels. And there'll be a point at which your feet say, ouch, that's really sore. Please stay at that point. Don't go further. But if you're not feeling much yet, you can walk your hands up your thighs and bring your torso upright, and then gravity is putting all your body weight down into the muscles of the base of the feet. Now this is a stretch, and it's an intense one. So don't feel like you have to stay here for a long time. You can come out and take a rest at any point. But if you're relatively comfortable, we'll stay here for about 3 cycles of breath. And when I'm breathing in my yoga practice, I'm really intentional and quite deliberate about expanding my belly, forward on the inhale, and then contracting back on the exhale. And last cycle of breath. Good. And then coming out of that pose, I plant my hands, keeping my toes curled under and lifting the pelvis up and back. But notice I'm keeping my knees bent. Often when we try and straighten the knees, we go like this with the spine. And rounding the back is not beneficial. It's counterintuitive to our goal. Our goal is to stretch the backs of the legs. And so it's helpful to do that with slightly bent knees so that we can lengthen the arms and then create this hinging in the hips. And slowly, maybe the heels reach the floor, but that's not the goal. The goal is really just a stretch in the backs of the legs. So this is Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog pose. And it's such a good one for skiers because it stretches the entire posterior chain from the glutes down through the hamstrings, calves, Achilles tendon, the feet even. All right, and then coming back to all fours. So I'm going to go counter to that, the back side of the legs, and I'm going to open the front side of the chest. And this is where, if you have blocks handy, you can use blocks, or I'm going to show you a couple of other things that you can use. So I'm going to place my blocks. I could use a foam roller as well, or a bolster. And then I'm going to be putting my upper arm bones against the blocks, bringing my hands together, and then allowing my chest to reach down towards the mat. Now, if that's not possible, if blocks are not an option, what you'll do instead is just extend your hands against the wall, like so, and then you drop your chest towards the wall, and that works the same way. So coming into this opening for the chest, whichever way works best for you. And then we'll pause here for about 3 or 4 cycles of breath. Let's come out of the pose. Slowly extend my arms, walk my hands backwards on the block, and then move them off to the side. Excellent. So backs of the legs, front of the chest. Now I'm going to go to the lateral glutes with a figure 4 pose. And now we're going to transition into foam rolling or myofascial release. So for this, if you have it, make sure your lacrosse ball is handy or your foam roller. We'll start with a stretch, lying on your back, crossing right ankle over left thigh, and then drawing your left knee towards your chest, threading right hand under right leg, and then left fingertips interlace. Now you can draw your knee in towards your chest, or you can just extend the right leg away from you. But please make sure that you flex your right ankle as if you're trying to put your foot against a flat surface. The reason for that is it prevents the foot from sickling and the angle of the tibia from moving in a way where it creates an unnecessary amount of torque in the knee joint. So we activate these muscles to make the knee joint a little more stable as we're stretching the outer hip. Now, if you've been on snow recently, this part of the body could be pretty tight. We'll switch figure 4 with the other leg, left leg over right thigh. And again, we activate the ankle, flexing it and making sure it's not rolling out or in, but it's as if you're trying to step on something flat. And uncrossing. Okay, now we're just going to come up part way. And I'm going to show you how I use the lacrosse ball to create a bit of a massaging action against a muscle called the tensor fasciae lata. It's the muscle at the end of the iliotibial band. And in skiing, we rely a lot on the IT band to create stability because we're balanced predominantly on one leg at a time. But if we try and roll the IT band, to my research and in my anecdotal experience and my observation of my students, rolling the IT band does nothing except hurt. And what I found is much more effective is putting a little bit of pressure against the tensor fascia latae. So the way we find it is by placing the lacrosse ball on the outer hip, and the TFL is more anterior. It's a little bit more to the front of the body. And it takes a little experimenting. But once I find it, oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. It's unmistakable once you find it. So I'm going to put that there so that you can see where I have discovered that on me. Now, given your dimensions, your anatomy is going to be a little bit different than mine perhaps, but it's just towards the front in the lower part of the hip. Here's the crest of my pelvis. So that's the spot. And then once I'm finding it, I'm not going to stick all of my body weight there right away. I'm just rolling gently towards the lacrosse ball. This is called myofascial release. I first learned about it 10 years ago when I was rehabbing an injury. My physiotherapist introduced me to this amazing technique of deep tissue massage. And there are multiple theories about what myofascial release is doing. And I talk about those a little bit in week 3. In particular, I mention the gait control theory of pain and how that relates to myofascial release. So if you haven't got there yet, it's so fascinating. Basically, the brain and the body are much more intimately linked than we often think. Now we'll switch to the opposite side, the TFL, for me on my left hip. Now, contraindications for myofascial release work. There is not a ton of research on this, but one thing you want to avoid, obviously, is if you have an injury, don't push on that injury. In particular, a tear to the muscle, a bruise, and in some very rare cases, if someone is prone to blood clot, that could be dislodged. Pushing on it through myofascial release could be bad. Oh, goodness. Oh, now what's interesting about myofascial release is over time, you actually develop a bit of a tolerance, and then your experience goes from being painful to actually being like wonderful. It's intense, but it doesn't hurt. For me, it's sort of a hurt so good, if you will. And then I'm going to leave that one. Now with the foam rolling, what I highly recommend focusing on are hips and hamstrings. If we're skiing with good alignment, our quadriceps should not be working as hard as the lateral glutes and the hamstrings. Now that might not be the case yet, but as you work this season on your technique, one side benefit of finding good alignment and relying on the ski's design instead of using brute force to turn the skis is you'll find that you have less fatigue in your legs generally, and especially less fatigue in the quadriceps. So right now I'm using the foam roller on my hamstrings, and in particular towards the insertion of the pelvis. I'm using my breath to psychologically encourage relaxation of the tissue. By thinking it, I create it. And then switching to the opposite hamstrings. And another thing that breathing while you're moving does is it draws your attention into the action of the body. If we really want to master movement discipline, attention is the key to mastery, to not just being good, but being great. And so every opportunity that I have to connect my conscious attention to what's happening in my body, I use it. And then moving the foam roller off to the side. Oh, sorry, there's a ruckus going on. I'm just going to explain one thing about the body to change your conceptualization of how it works. We use a lot of language to describe stacking the joints or stacking the body segments in order to balance in between the forces acting on the body. And this kind of language still persists in skiing today. But I want to blow your mind perhaps with an entirely different framework. This is what's called a tensegrity. And tensegrity is a term from architecture, and it means tensional integrity. It's kind of like the same concept as a tent. You have the dense structures, which for us would be like the bones. And then you have the elastic structures, which would be like our connective tissue and our muscles. Now, if you think about the body this way, it's actually much more accurate and I think more helpful for understanding why it's so incredibly important to restore balance to our joint action. So right now, this structure is a certain shape and it can handle load. But imagine that I really pinch one side and it becomes rigid. Everything else has become tight and prone to snap. Like the tension throughout the whole structure now has changed and it's become much more rigid and maybe not as good at managing loads. Now it kind of collapses now on this side instead of being able to distribute load throughout the whole structure. So there's a way to think about the body that I think helps you be more mindful, first of all, about how you take care of it, but maybe changes the way you think about your ski technique as well. So for our purposes in our daily stretching practice, we want to compensate for the over adaptation of the muscles to load. And I'm just going to give you one example. So for skiers, we tend to balance majority of our body weight on one leg at a time. And so this whole lateral chain overdevelops relative to the inner chain. And then that can actually have an effect of causing the femur to deviate this way. I have no idea what's going on up there. And when the femur deviates this way, you can get something, you can get actually a misalignment at the joint. This lateral side becomes overtaxed. And in fact, the most common ski-related injury is a tear to the lateral collateral ligament. So if we can roll this part of the quadriceps, if we can strengthen the adductors and the lateral glutes, we create balance in that tensegrity so that the joints are stable and strong. So now what I want to introduce you to is instability training, which has been a new addition to my repertoire of training things that I do throughout my summer and a little bit while I'm in ski season as well. So with my wobble board, I'm gonna use the wall maybe for balance, or I have my ski poles as well. And using my ski poles for balance is not quite as good as holding onto the wall. So if you don't have a wobble board, again, you can just stand on a blanket, and because it's not a stable surface, it's gonna give you a little bit of the feeling of being on a wobble board. So stepping onto my wobble board, feet just a little bit wider than hip distance. And then the first thing I'm going to do is extend and flex the ankle, like so. So I'm trying to keep my pelvis in a neutral position, and as much as possible, keeping equal balance between the left and the right foot. And as I do that, maybe I can start to bounce without using my poles as much. Okay, so this is in our ski instructor terminology. This is how I cause the ski to pitch. And this is incredibly important in bumps. Being able to open the ankle so that I can direct the ski tips down into the trough of the bump, and then flexing the ankle joint to absorb. So I do this to begin to just connect with my balance. Oh, using my right leg more than my left. And then once I have that, now I'm going to work on lateral balance. So putting these down to the side for a second. So my lateral balance, I'm going to find neutral. And without ski boots on, it's actually really difficult to get the ankle. There we go, bending at the right amount. So I'm going to be moving the wobble board laterally, left foot down, right foot up, and then switching through neutral to the other side. Now, if you're not using a wobble board, just shift your balance to balancing just on one foot at a time. And here's the secret to this one. I'm not pushing my foot to the outside. I'm going to pull up by flexing in my hip the opposite foot. So I'm going to pull up my right foot by flexing my hip. And by doing it that way, I should be able to keep my pelvis neutral, my center of mass directly over my base of support, but I'm shifting effectively my weight from one edge to the other. When I do this, because I'm on a wobble board, my foot wants to go like that, but I'm deliberately rolling to the inside edge of my foot. I'm in a low athletic stance as I do this, and I can feel my lateral glutes working really hard, and my adductors. And mentioning from earlier, these ones I want to strengthen, and these ones I want to stretch. Okay, so now with the poles, this is where it gets interesting. We get into rotation. So I'm going to balance right in the center of my wobble board. And in a low athletic stance, I'm just going to rotate my femur and my hip socket just 2 to 3 degrees. It's very tiny. It's a super small movement, rotating. And so this one, if you don't have the wobble board, you won't necessarily be able to do, but you could put a towel on hardwood or linoleum flooring, and you could practice this that way. So when I do this, I need to counterbalance. I need to create this upper lower body separation so that as I rotate my femur inwards, I'm going to put more pressure into my opposite pole, just like I would do if I was skiing with my pole plant. Ooh, okay, so find center, rotate. Now you won't have to do this for long. This will be burning. Really good for strengthening the rotators. So for stability, what we do on one side, we always do on the other. So I'm balancing with both of my poles, but in particular, my opposite pole. Looks just like I'm pole planting. So when we weren't sure because of COVID, if the hills were going to open, I was like, I'm getting on my wobble board. I'm going to strengthen all the muscles that I know I'm going to need so that when I get on snow, I'm all ready to go. Okay, and that's the 3 exercises in the instability part of your practice that I recommend starting with. Well, now what I'm going to do is guide you through some breath work and some meditation work. So for that, if you have a blanket or a cushion, please sit in a way where you can elevate your pelvis slightly. And I'm just going to check in. If anyone can't hear me, please let me know. Just unmute and say a little louder, please, and I can readjust. Okay. Looks like we're good. So in our seated posture, when it comes to breath work, we want to make sure as much as possible that we're maintaining a neutral spinal alignment. And what I mean by that is that we have a concave curve in the neck and a convex curve in the upper back, the thoracic spine, and concave in the lumbar spine. And again, a little convex in the sacrum, the tailbone. And the way that I maintain that is I can feel that balance point and I adjust everything. And then all of a sudden it becomes easy to find this plumb line, this vertical alignment. Once I have that, I'm ready to start my breath practice. Introduction to breath work, the idea of why it's important for skiers is we can use our breath to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, this is the action that brings us out of fight or flight and down into rest and digest. It can be helpful if you're trying to learn something and you're slightly overwhelmed. Just take 5 or 6 slow breaths to bring the nervous system down. And that's going to help you redirect your attention away from that feeling of anxiety and being hyper-vigilant to your surroundings, and to recast your attention into the task. Also, if you're trying something really beyond your current ability level, something challenging and intimidating, being able to breathe so that you can, again, dial the nervous system down is going to be like a superpower. So here's step 1 of how we do this. Allowing the belly to be soft. With the inhale, we expand the belly into our right hand. And with the exhale, feel the belly draw back away from your hand. So with the inhale, the belly inflates. And with the exhale, the belly draws back towards the spine. So just that, creating a neutral, aligned spine and allowing the belly to expand and contract so that the diaphragm can work properly. That will increase the breath. It increases the total amount of air that can get into your lungs and increases the efficiency of your breath. And now here's the ratio to trigger the parasympathetic nervous system response. We'll inhale for a count of 4, and we'll exhale for a count of 6. So please close your eyes. You can keep your hand on your belly if that's helpful, or you can place it back on your thigh. Altogether, we empty the lungs to inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, pausing. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Inhaling, 2, 3, 4. Exhaling, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's the idea. If we can extend the length of the exhale relative to the inhale, that's all we need to do to bring the nervous system down. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, zoom ahead to meditation. Bear with me 1 second while I make that switch. Oh, excuse me. Okay. So for our meditation practice, I want to explain what meditation is not right off the bat. So meditation is not about clearing your mind or stopping your thoughts. A lot of people have that mistaken idea that they need to stop thinking in order to be meditating. This is sort of it's a misinterpretation. You cannot turn off your thoughts, but what you can do is narrow your focus of attention so finely that you're completely aware of each of the thoughts in the second they're arising, and then you let them go just as fast. This constant refocusing of attention in the present moment to whatever you're thinking almost makes it seem like you're not thinking at all. It feels, or I guess your experience is, as if there are no thoughts. That's not what's happening. Your attention is so sharply attuned to whatever thought's happening in the moment, you lose the capacity to perceive the coming and going of the thoughts. You lose the sense of time in a way. That's getting very kind of technical in the world of meditation. For our purposes, all we need to do is to practice paying attention to whatever is happening in the present moment. It sounds kind of simple, but it's actually really not. And that's because every thought triggers an emotion and a judgment. And the judgment and emotion kind of creates a hook. The thought gets stuck, and then there's a spiral. The thought creates an emotion. The emotion triggers yet more thought. And we can ruminate and spiral down and get lost in our thoughts. So for our purposes, number one, we're focusing our attention on whatever is happening. And number two, and even more important, we're doing so without judgment. Because the minute judgment enters into the equation, we get hooked, and then the whole thing unravels. So please close your eyes. And there's no need to maintain a specific posture or type of breathing. And to start the practice, observe something really tangible. Observe how your body feels right now. Notice if there's any tension or holding. You can draw your awareness to temperature and the feeling of the air. And the muscles that are contracting. Now this is an outer level, paying attention to the outer layer of our awareness, what's happening in the body. And moving one level more subtle, we focus on the breath. The pace of the breath, the cadence of the breath, and the sensation of the breath. And now, no matter what's happening, be it a thought or a sensation or a sound, we allow ourselves to become aware of it. So put our attention like a spotlight on that thing, but without judgment. And that's really the key to this practice. Disconnecting the judgment from the observation. And all of the feel-good, new agey dialogue that accompanies this experience of meditation comes from the experience of not having emotions rise and fall along with the thoughts. Creating this subtle pause in between observation and the reaction to that observation, the body. And with practice, we gradually stretch out that pause as we train greater and greater control over directing our attention. In the interest of time, unfortunately, we'll wrap up our practice now. It is bowing the chin towards the chest. In the same way I mentioned in the beginning of the practice that we would hit pause on our day to put our attention into the practice, we can now unpause and enter back into the day, but retaining all of the benefit of this practice.